Hey, Derek Depker here, Bestseller Secrets here with Lisa Michaud, who is author of the book Slanted and Disenchanted, an author pretty much, first time as of about a year ago. Is that correct, Lisa?
Yes, last
Yes,
September. Yes.
last September. So, depending on when you're seeing this, this is kind of a great stage where we're going to be talking about kind of what was that journey like writing the book, launching the book. You kind of now have this point where you can debrief, look back, and be like, okay, here's what worked. Here's what I might have done different for this launch. What am I going to do going forward for this next book? And sharing some of these insights with you. So, thank you so much for being here, Lisa.
Thanks for having me. It's so nice to see you again after
Yeah,
after a year.
yeah, great to see you again. We were working together, helping with your book launch, and so fill us in a little bit on your background. How'd you get into the whole become an author thing? What inspired you to get out there and write a book and launch it?
Well, I'm coming to you from France. I live outside of Paris, and the one job that a lot of us Americans, Anglo community job that we get when we move here, the easiest job to find is writing small articles and for blogs, travel pieces, just kind of giving like an Anglo bird's eye view on what's going on in Paris. So, I couldn't get a job just working at a grocery store because at the time my French wasn't good enough. So I had to be creative. And one of the jobs that I was able to find, luckily, was travel blogging. So I began writing, 6 to 7 hours a day, doing more investigative work, investigative meaning just going to cafes and just seeing just what was going on in like the social scene culturally. And I started jotting down these notes and I created a book out of that. That's not the book that I published. I ended up going in a completely different direction, but it sharpened my writing muscles or flexed my writing muscles rather, to write every single day, but not particularly on subjects that like were in passion me. I didn't really love writing about cafes and restaurants, but it got me thinking that, hey, I can do this and like on a bigger scale. And I always thought I would write the big Paris book, An American Girl in Paris. And there's tons of them and they're fantastic. And I did write it, but it didn't resonate. It wasn't the book that I was meant to publish. And so that's how this whole thing started. And I had a blog built in. So I had like a very small readership as well. I had a blog for about 10 years. So I had all these readers waiting to, see what I was going to put out. And I did surprise them because they think they wanted the American Girl in Paris story. But I think I pleasantly surprised them. And I've read a lot of their reviews and they've been very complimentary. And so I kind of came in this with a few readers in my pocket.
Awesome. And that leads us into the book Slanted and Disenchanted. And one of the things I want to touch upon, because this will apply to then when we get into like marketing, getting reviews and things like that, would be the concept of the story, some of the themes, for instance, music and things like that. So can you elaborate and kind of fill us in a little bit about the themes and the topic of your first book here? And then that'll kind of set us up for what we're going to get into in a little bit.
Sure. Well, one of the things that I like to talk about when what came about writing this novel was that I didn't put too much thought into it. It wasn't like I sat down and I said, I'm going to write a novel about a rock band set in the year 2000 that has like Generation X references, rock references. I didn't think about any of those things. I just had this story in my head that was kind of nagging at me and these characters that I didn't even know about. I didn't know who these people were. And it always sounds, when I talk to people who aren't writers, I sound kind of crazy because it doesn't make sense. How could you have characters in your head? But I did. And so I just said, all right, well, why don't I just open up a Word document and just kind of regurgitate what these thoughts are. And little by little, like the story just started building. And I was like, oh, and they're in a rock band. Okay, why not? And I just kind of went with it. And you sent a newsletter out, I think last week, touching upon this, on how when you don't think about things, sometimes you can really put together a really beautiful piece of work. And that's what happened. I didn't sit there and say, I'm going to write the greatest book ever written. I said, I'm going to just write these thoughts in my head. And it over time was sculpted like a piece of marble into a novel with the rock references and all the things that I love, all the music, pop culture references, movies, the 90s. And it all just came in through the dialogue. And what kind of shaped these characters' lives is pop culture. You're a kid of the 80s, just like me. Like, we grew up, pop culture was all around us. We're in the MTV generation. So much of who we are as adults, like, really, we look back on those commercials we saw, those, best of the 80s compilations. And so I kind of tied all of those references in with a story.
Yeah, there's a couple great lessons there. One thing here, and this is true whether it's writing a book, is doing pretty much anything creative, which is you didn't put the pressure on yourself to be like, I got to write the greatest book ever written, right? And this is one of those maybe counterintuitive sort of things that sometimes your best work comes out when you're not trying to create your best work. And it's like, well, what does that mean? Does it mean you just like don't care if you're publishing, oh, I'm just going to write something crappy or whatever? Well, it's not that necessarily either. It's more of a letting go and allowing things to unfold. And it is, I think a lot of creatives have this experience where it's like, yeah, there's these characters in my head. I don't even know what they're going to do. Let's see how this story unfolds. Oh, that's interesting that they chose to do that. Oh, and they're in a rock band and they're going to do this. And so it is this sort of thing where you set your intention, you get started, and then at the same time, it's not trying to force too much. And I think I even heard there's kind of the plotter versus pantser approach. Plotters who plot everything out, pantsers fly by the seat of their pants. And both of them can work for different authors. I remember Stephen King, though, saying like if he tried to map out the whole ending in advance, like one book that he did that with, he's like, that was like one of my worst books, right? So sometimes just allowing things to flow and seeing where it takes you. And then you're incorporating things that you love. And this is one of those things where for any creative act, again, whether it's writing a book, it could be like, what do I love? What are my interests? And then that can excite you to write the book. The thing is, what I want many authors to get, if not every author to get, is this idea of like, you can do that throughout the whole process. When you're marketing, which we'll come up to here in a bit, you can still incorporate the things that you love. When I write newsletters, I'll sometimes talk about music or Brazilian jiu-jitsu or something and just be like, what's something that I'm interested in and how can I tie this into a message? So that there's a couple lessons there that you got. And I imagine some authors are out there, they're still working on their first book after, 17 years in progress, like the never ending book. So what do you think helped you go from like idea, you start writing to actually getting the book complete and published and out there in the world?
Well, I have one like kind of slogan I swear by, and it's called progress, not perfection. And because if you chase perfection, you're never going to get anywhere. You will be writing that book for 17 years. And my book that's already published, I won't even read it now because I'm like, I'm sure I'll find something because there's always something. And but the whole journey, at the end of the day, it is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to interest you. It's not supposed to be a chore. Even though some days I don't always feel like opening my laptop. But, Patti Smith was once told when she would have writer's block and she didn't know what to do with it. And someone just said, when there's a wall in front of you, just kick it down, just keep writing. And I think that might be the pantser, method of working. I kind of do both. Like I map everything out and then I take the back roads. I get off the I-5 and I take the back roads on my way up north to Seattle. And because you don't know where your characters are going to go. You don't know where it's going to take you. You don't know what kind of like inspiration, the muse, I guess, as we call it too, is how it's going to come about. But yeah, the journey was pretty, it was pretty straightforward in terms of writing it, finding an editor that I really trusted and who understood the work, because the book is written in first person. It's casual. It's meant to be like a new adult YA book. So, at the end of the day, it's not haute literature. It's not Shakespeare. But I found somebody who got it, but I still wanted the technical versions, the aspect of the book to be clean and professional and proofread properly. So I found someone who went through 3 edits with me. And then I found somebody else to look at it with fresh eyes to do another round of edits. And then I had someone else right before publication, because as writers, you'll always keep tweaking, to do one last sweep. So, I mean, I've heard stories that sometimes it's hard to find editors. I found mine on Upwork. And every time I've looked on Upwork for editing work, I've always gotten quality. So if I could give any advice, that would be one, because I do see on some of the Facebook boards that a lot of authors have trouble finding editors, and I would just say Upwork. Send a sample, have them make sure you gel with the editor, because that's important. But that was the big first step in getting the manuscript back polished and in like almost publishable form. It's quite exciting. And anyone who's plucking away at a manuscript for years, just maybe toss it to someone else to give it some, a fresh look and to rework it that way, because you stop seeing your work after, I don't know, the 100th time you've read it. You can't see it anymore.
Yeah, some great insights there. So you started by saying progress, not perfection, and that's so key. I mean, it's one of the things that we can say it, we can intellectually get it. Putting it into practice is the real, challenge, or the thing is to go, okay, how do we really focus on not making it perfect? It's not ever going to be perfect, and so reminding yourself, having that even as a mantra, can help. And then one things that I think about are like, what are some of my favorite books or favorite works or favorite songs, anything like that? And I'm like, did I enjoy it because it was perfect? Or have I watched videos that are great and maybe it's someone speaking on something? Did they trip over some words every now and then? Sure. Did I care? No. Right. Have I read books? I know this shocks and horrifies some people. And I'm like, have I read some books with spelling and grammar mistakes? Yeah. Did it bother me? No. I know, again, some people are like, it really trips them up. Okay, that's fine. The thing is, most people, now this is say, don't get an editor, of course, get an editor and a proofreader, as you're saying. At the same time, I think to myself, I'm like, could I probably find a little mistake here and there if I go back through my manuscript, even after it's gone through multiple rounds of editing and stuff? Yeah. Have I? Yeah. Right. The thing is, do I need to go through this 100 times to find every little thing here and there, to find like the needle in the haystack, little missing comma or whatever? Or do I realize that there are people who are really going to enjoy this book, and it's like I'm robbing them of that experience? When you really believe in your book, it's like it's robbing people of that experience because of some sort of perfectionistic type of thing, instead of going, okay, this is progress for me. It's good enough. It's at a level of excellence, not perfection, but it's excellent enough that I can get it out in the world and now people can enjoy it. So it helps me to think about, like, do I want to hold this back from people who are really going to like this, or do I want to share it with them? And then you mentioned an editor. I'd like to touch upon that in a moment. I'm curious, before you went to an editor, did you have any sort of like deadline for yourself, or how did you even know, like, internally the book is done, it's ready to go to an editor?
I didn't set an actual deadline. It felt ready to be released. Like it just, I had written it. Written a few drafts. I had my husband read it, ask questions. I had my mom read it. I know everyone says, oh, you can't have your family members read your manuscript, but you know what? It wasn't for them to tell me how great it was. It was for them to ask honest questions, just finding little holes that I didn't see. And so after I went through some rounds of edits with family members, then I felt ready to go to someone who didn't know me and who could say, this isn't a great story, or to give it honest feedback. And so that was really it. A lot of my decisions, they weren't really intellectually like mapped out. It all just felt very like I went on feeling. It felt right. It had, everyone in my immediate circle did the best they could. And now it was time to move on to the next phase.
Yeah, and there's something to that too, because a lot of times what does slow people down is the overthinking. They do intellectualize it. I'm certainly that type to overanalyze, so I can relate to those going through that challenge. So a lot of this is allowing yourself to just sort of feel your way through it. There's an intuitive approach to it, and it goes back to even the idea, like, if you're trying to think about it too much, trying to force it. I think it's called like maybe paradoxical intentions or something like that, where it's like it'd be like when you're trying to fall asleep at night, you're like, fall asleep, I need to fall asleep. It's like if you try to force it, it's the very thing that keeps you from falling asleep. So there's a similar sort of like letting go and allowing. Again, that's a theme here. And then You also did something which is important, which you talked about an editor, also even family members and things like that reading it. And that's so key because it is, to me, a co-creative process. You're going to have things, like you say, if you just keep reading it, you don't even notice the things. Or in your mind as the author, you're like, I know what I mean here. I know what it is. But someone else looks at it and goes, wait, I'm missing how this leads to this. And it's like, oh yeah, like it's an internal thing in your own brain that's not necessarily clear for other people. And so that's why it's so important. Maybe not like the earliest drafts, but it's not like I need to get this whole thing totally polished and finished before anyone else takes a look at it. It's bringing people in while it's still in development, and not just developmental editors, it could be other people, getting that feedback as soon as possible, because that can guide you. And so going back to the author who's taken 17 years or maybe just 7 years or a number of years, or it's just gone on longer and longer and longer, and they're not quite getting it done. There could be a number of reasons for that. One thing though might be if they're stuck, it's like if the answer was in your brain, you probably would have figured it out by now. So now it's time to allow someone else's brain, someone else's perspective to give you some feedback. And then sometimes that's all it takes to be like, oh, I see what to do, and move on, or go, oh, actually, they really loved it. It's ready to go. Let's just polish this up and get it out there. And then you mentioned you found an editor on Upwork. So I'm sure a question that some might have is, you mentioned, just making sure you gel with them and stuff, giving them something to work on. Is there anything that you did in particular you found was helpful to identify a good editor and make sure that they were a fit? And did you have other options that you were trying to choose between, and how'd you settle on the editor that you went with?
It was choosing the actual editor that actually was trickier than I thought it would be, because everyone was great. I put out a post. I received about close to 100 responses. And so then I went through, the CVs and background. So, once I whittled it down to 10 that I really liked, I had sent them about 500 to 1,000 words, whatever they felt comfortable with, to kind of to edit it, to see what their style was. And that was even hard because all of the samples were fantastic. I was, oh, shoot. So the editor I ended up going with, we were just chatting, and she had told me that she had traveled on a few tour buses because she was working on some rock festival a few years ago. I liked her age. She was older. I did want to work with someone older. And so she had rock background. And for me, that was like, all right, that's cool. And like, she's still a friend of mine. I can't wait to work with her on the second book. So that was really, it was her professionalism, but then her like side hustle experience, that she was the only editor that had been on a tour bus, and she caught some of my mistakes. She was like, that wouldn't happen because, and she explained why. And I got to make the story more real because I had somebody who'd been on an actual tour bus.
Yeah. So you're talking about someone who can provide insights, not just proofreading, spelling and grammar, someone that actually understands it's kind of the genre. It's also really the themes in there, right? The music concepts, the being on a tour bus, what that's like. Is that realistic? How would it need to be adjusted? And then also vibing on a personal level. Sounds like maybe similar kind of values and attitude about things. And so that's really key. And so did the editor offer that up voluntarily? Is this come through a conversation that you kind of found you had, made that connection? I'm just trying to imagine for people going like, okay, I got these people, I maybe whittled it down to 10, like you, maybe they're like, how do I choose between this? Do you have anything that you look back and you go, I'm glad I did fill in the blank, because that really helped me settle on this particular editor?
How it happened, she knew it was a book about a rock band. And I mean, the portion that she edited, they weren't even on a tour bus yet. It was like the beginning. It was like when they were still living at their mom's house. So she had offered that voluntarily. And I said, well, that's interesting, because they do end up on a tour bus. But the interesting thing I have to mention to you, Derek, is that I wrote the book in 3 parts, thinking it was supposed to be just one book. And when it was finished and edited, and I was ready to like publish it and start going through the marketing aspect of the book, I said, I wrote 3 books in one. And I went in and went in there with like an axe and hacked up the 3 books and then puffed out the 3 stories. So now they're 3 separate books. So even in this book that's on the shelves now, it's not, there's no tour bus on it. So she had edited all 3 parts. So I have these 3 volumes. So the second book, which is a continuation of the story, comes out next spring. So that was kind of an beep moment where I was like, oh shoot, I wrote 3 books in one, but then it was like, wait a minute, but I had that, it was like a cornucopia of story. So I had to go back in, and that set me back another year because I had to like puff out that first story.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's a nice thing to know that you have 3 books now to release. I mean, maybe more than initially anticipated, and it's great though. And especially this is for fiction authors, novelists, that oftentimes can be the case where you end up with a series, multiple books, something that could be expanded upon. And then for nonfiction authors, you can almost always pull out, like, there's a lesson here that sometimes the best books aren't like these massive encyclopedias of all things on a particular topic. Sometimes it's pulling out individual aspects, or, hey, this first section can be its own book. This next section can be its own book. And so looking at the work that you create, I was just talking to an author the other day, and a mental brainstorming process is this idea of extraction and combination. And you can do both. And so the extraction would be, what can I pull out from this? Maybe I can pull out the beginning of the book and it's its own short story prequel, right? Maybe I can pull out the, certain scenes from books or certain themes and make them their own little bonus thing. Or combination, very common thing would be creating a box set or an anthology or a collection with other authors and stuff. So you can think about the work, any work that you create, whether it's a manuscript or you've been in business for 20 years writing, you think, can I pull things out of my work and create these own little pieces, or can I combine it together? Another aspect of pulling things out, particularly for novelists, would be, could I create a spinoff? And I was just thinking, I must have saw something the other day where there's Breaking Bad, and then there's the spinoff of Better Call Saul, which was the attorney, for those who don't know, in Breaking Bad. So they there's characters, or there's the Boba Fett series for Star Wars. Like, are there characters that you can do these spinoffs with? And so now that becomes a creative exercise where you can look at your work and be like, this might be multiple works in one, or this work could now become part of something even bigger. And so that's cool for not only the book itself, but also marketing ideas and creating, say, other content from a derivative content. So you got the book edited. You had some people look at it. Now it was probably coming into the phase where you're about to launch it. I'm curious, what did you do in terms of for launching it when it came to reviews and getting, did you have early readers? Did you have people ready to review the book when it came out? What was that process like for you?
I contacted all of my old blog readers, and I sent them physical ARCs in the mail, signed. And I did ask, if you'd like to leave a review, you can, an honest review. If not, no worries. It just, for me, it was a pleasure of sending them a book, because they had spent so much time on my blog, following my career, following me on social media, that it was just really the very least I could do. But I did say, if you like it, that would be fantastic. And most of them did do it, and that was great. And then I worked with Books Go Social, and they, which is part of NetGalley. And I had my book on their network. So then I had a bunch of people who I didn't know read the book, which was exciting and really scary, because the reviews were very mixed. Because, you're really sending it out into like the ether of like just hardcore readers. So there were some people that just like went gaga over the book, fell in love, and like wrote these fantastic things on Goodreads. And some people, they didn't even put that on Goodreads. The reviews I got back were just scathing. And you just kind of, it's part of the journey. And, you go think back, oh, what didn't they like about it? But it's just, for some reason, the bad reviews always sound louder. They kind of scream at you. But it's part of it, and you read your favorite book and you go into the 1-star reviews, and they've got hundreds of them. And, these writers are still writing, and it's part, it's a casualty of the business. that someone's not going to like your book. But yeah, so I worked with Books Go Social, and then I reached out to my followers on social media, and I was able to get a nice chunk of reviews before it was published.
Awesome. Yeah. So Books Go Social, your followers, that's how you found some reviewers. And that is actually the reading one-star reviews of books you like. It's a very enlightening process. I think it's useful to go through for any author to do this. For me, sometimes it makes my blood boil. I guess I'm like this. I remember there's a book. I was so good. I'm like, this is such a good book, like helpful and things like that. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I can't imagine like people leaving a one-star review for this book. And I go through and I start reading the one-star reviews and I'm like, what are these people thinking? No, they're so wrong or whatever. And it just proves the point though, like no matter how good your book is, no matter how much some people love it, there's going to be some people who just hate it. They don't like it. And that's actually usually a good sign if there's strong feelings in both directions, right? The issue is if people like, yeah, it was pretty good. Yeah, okay, I like it. Like if that's just a bunch of like lukewarm sort of stuff, it's probably not going to have the level of success as, the really big successful books tend to have people hate it or people love it. Obviously, there's going to be some middle ground. Usually it's a little more polarizing. And so for the scathing reviews, and you also mentioned some people loved it. I'm curious, like the scathing reviews, was it, I'm just thinking, were they like not like the ideal readers of this book, or what do you think it was that they didn't like about it? Like, why do you think there was some people who hated it and some people who loved it? I don't know if they hated it, but left negative reviews versus some people who really loved it.
Well, the book is like, it's very particular. I mean, it's told in two, it's a dual POV between a guy and a girl in their 20s. And I don't know, they didn't like the style. The guy character that I wrote, he's brazen. He's kind of like rough around the edges. So maybe they didn't like that. I don't know. I don't think they like the style. And there's a lot of music references. One quote stuck out to me. I feel like I'm on the outside of a private joke between the writer and all her rock snob friends. And I was like, oh no, I was really trying to like share this like exciting knowledge and not be pretentious, because I really don't think I am, or the book was. But I remember reading that, just being like, oh shoot, I made her feel bad. And so that one made me sad. And then just someone else is just like this, they just didn't like the story. And what it is what it is. But the people that really liked the story, which is great, they picked out things that I wasn't even sure people would like. Like the good reviews, they picked out some like details of the story that for me were like details I liked, of course, but like that meant something to them. Some girl tweeted to me that my book changed her life. I almost cried. And because one of the characters represents her. And she says that this kind of character isn't represented enough in fiction. And I brought this character to her, and she felt that had changed her life because she felt heard and she felt represented. And for me, that's worth all the scathing reviews and the one-star reviews, except for the girl who felt like she was outside of the joke, because I was trying to reel people in on the joke because it was funny stuff. But I'm dealing also with different ages, so not everyone's going to catch on to something that was on TV in 92. So you can't please everyone.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think most people probably heard that you can't please everyone. You kind of get it. Again, okay, intellectually, I get it. And then still it's like, ooh, but I really hope as many people as possible enjoy it. And, I ask, and thank you for sharing that and being open about that, because, it'd be one thing if some people were like, this just didn't make any sense, I was confused or whatever. That would be like, okay, this is some editing developmental thing versus style, references, things like that. That's a perfect example of the kind of thing that it can be in a strange sort of good way. Like that is the kind of stuff where you want people like, hey, if it's not your style, it's just like music, right? A band isn't necessarily trying to appeal to everyone. A rock band doesn't get upset that some people don't like rock music. They're not going to be like, oh, well, we can't write rock music. We got to write like, jazz. We got to play like jazz standards because some people don't like rock. It's like, well, now some people aren't going to like that, or like, what are you going to like pick what you're going to do, right? Play that style, and the people who like it, they'll come to the show. The people who don't like it, great, they can go somewhere else, check out another artist or band, right? And so you mentioned that, you know, the book for one reader changed their life, and that is, as you say, like when you focus on the people who are impacted by your book, who love it, who their lives will change. That for me is one way that I kind of deal with the critics or the people like that, is I go, okay, am I going to focus on the people who don't like it or the people who absolutely love it? Right. If I'm going to open up an Italian restaurant, am I going to focus on someone who comes in and goes, oh, I don't like Italian food? Okay, well, what about the people who do like Italian food? Like that's for them. So like you can go somewhere else, again, just like with the bands. And you know, as far even like kind of the feeling like there's these inside references and things like that. This is another challenge, because actually having that does give some people the feeling of like, ooh, I get what she was talking about there. There's kind of like that. I appreciate like wanting to be inclusive. And there is something about people being like, ooh, I get these things. I get these bands. I do understand it. And there are going to be some people who are like, I don't know this era. It's not really my thing. And that's where, from a marketing perspective, part of it is just being able to get the right readers, the ideal readers who do feel like they're part of it. They do feel like they're kind of inside this world. Oh, I know what Lisa's talking about there. Oh, I get that reference. That's really cool. Because they get like, that's the whole polarizing thing. They really love it now because they get it, and they know maybe not everyone knows about these bands or these references, but I get it. And I feel like I'm seen, I'm validated, I'm understood. We're part of the same tribe, right? Just like when people go to shows and they're like, oh, you love this band too. I do. And it just creates that connection with people. So that's part of the story. And that's going to be true for any genre that you write in. And calling back to the idea of, you know, this book changed my life. I remember I wrote a message about, for any author of any book, thinking to yourself, imagining, you know, when we get into the marketing side, like picturing the people who might send you a message saying this book changed my life. I even said, like, I love this book so much, right? And someone goes, oh, well, that's for nonfiction authors. Doesn't really work for fiction. I'm like, okay, fiction readers still say they loved a book. And actually, it's usually stories that are the most transformational, whether real or fictionalized. If you look out through human history, it's the stories, it's even the mythology of thousands of years ago. That's how people change. That's how people on a psychological level, their lives were transformed primarily through stories. So I'm like, it's probably more relevant for fiction authors that your book, you know, whether it's a young adult novel, I know I've worked with romance authors, it can be sci-fi books, any book, children's books, especially too, working with children and teaching them lessons. The stories can change people's lives for the better. Might not be the main intention. Maybe you're writing it primarily for entertainment for some authors. Still, you can have that impact on people, and it can be so rewarding when you get that feedback. So all this is to be a reminder, whether you're at that stage in your writing journey or not, just imagining the people who, when you write a book that's powerful and impactful, people can read it and truly have their lives change for the better from the writing. All right. So you got some of those initial reviews. Now you're going into, okay, you're going to launch this book. What was your approach to getting the word out, beginning to market it, particularly now going beyond the people that you knew to people who maybe have never heard of you and getting discovered?
I went about it in a very kind of like a guerrilla style marketing way at first. I contacted, okay, so I like to follow zines, which is just underground news magazines, newspapers written by anyone, and they're sold on Etsy. It's part of my 90s DIY punk culture. So there's been this like neo wave of like zines. They're all coming back from women my age are putting them out, and young girls are carrying that culture from the 90s. And so I reached out to some of the zines that I personally liked and said, hey, so I have this book. Do you want to, could I do like an author interview, an exclusive excerpt? And a lot of the girls, it's mostly women who run them, that I reached out to, they were like super jazzed about it. Yeah, of course. And I got to do this kind of underground advertising, but it was genuine. I don't even want to use the word advertising because it wasn't. It was just putting the word out, writing essays about the book, and just getting it in circulation. And I saw, you know, with my sales, I could see what parts of the country were responding to it because I knew where the zines were being sold. And the purpose wasn't 100% to like sell books, it was to reach my ideal reader. And that's like the huge challenge. Before I started this whole journey, I'm like, how am I going to find my reader? And that was one way. Then there was also podcasts, which I worked on with you. And that was to get into the, into the reader writer community. So that was outside the punk DIY rock girl music scene. I wanted to also get involved with people who actually read books, who like carnivorously read books. So I did podcasts. And then I started doing Facebook ads. So with the mix of all three, I was able to find a little sweet spot of like finding my ideal readers. And I find Facebook ads a lot easier than Amazon ads. I'm learning Amazon. So I have no insight on Amazon ads, but the Facebook ads actually are really fun because I could really target exactly the person I wanted to see the book. And because of that, I've gotten emails and responses, and I'm like chatting with these people. I'm creating a community. It's like beyond selling a book. It's like talking about music, and I just get references and like, messages about references in the book. And it's so fun. Like people will take a photo of a line in my book and just be like this. And I'm like, thank you for like validating that it's funny, because I think it's funny. But, at the end of the day, I don't know if I'm just like this big nerd at my desk writing jokes and laughing to myself as I push my glasses up the bridge of my nose. But I'm able to tap into like my people and it's glorious.
Yeah, I love that. And so there's a couple things in there, and this is one of the things that I really admire about what you've done with the getting the word out about your book, because you've been able to think this is something that, it's like once you get it, maybe it can be obvious. When you're first starting out, some authors they're like, particularly if they're a novelist, they're like, wait, how do I find my readers? And you understood, among other things, this idea that like, well, you have these references in your book, you have, rock bands, you have these things. And so there's themes, there's things that show up in your book that can connect to, pop culture and rock music of that generation and things like that. So there are people who are fans of the concept, right? And so people who are interested in that. And then, this idea of kind of, being like the big nerd, and you're like, sort of these inside things, like, I think it's maybe writing, it's like, I think it's funny, or I think it's cool, or whatever. I don't know if anyone else is going to get it, but I enjoy it. And there's actually something really powerful about that, because it goes even back to what we were talking about earlier, not trying to think and trying to force it to be like a contrived sort of, I'm going to try to force this to be entertaining for others. It's like self-expression. It's like, this is what I really enjoy. And the right people, so to speak, will also enjoy it. And there's a certain trust in that. Like if you put out something that some people, they make videos or write jokes, or like, I think it's funny. If I'm the only one entertained by it, so be it. If they put it out there, and of course other people enjoy it. And this goes back to this like kind of a paradox, in that on one hand, you are writing to entertain others, and it's for other people. And I look at it sort of like someone who is on a dance floor, just dancing to the music by themselves. They're not really concerned about what other people think. They're like, I'm having fun. If I'm the only one having fun, so be it. Yet their energy kind of creates this invitation, be like, that person's having so much fun. I want to go out there and join them. Right. So sometimes by doing things from a purely sort of self-serving perspective, or just doing it for your own entertainment or whatever, that can actually be the most genuine way of creating something to where other people will just naturally be attracted to it, because chances are there's other people who share your passions, your loves, the same interests, the same style of humor, whatever it is. So that's a great lesson. And you talk about, I want to touch upon kind of the practical side. You mentioned some of the zines and things like that. So I know some authors are still going to kind of have this challenge of like, how do I find maybe whether it's podcast or publications or blogs or things that that I can promote my book on, particularly if it's a novelist or a fiction author. Like, what was the actual, you don't have to go like super deep into it, but what was the thought process of going, okay, here's my book. My ideal readers are out there. How do I find the people who might be interested in my book? Like, literally, like, were you Googling things? You're just thinking of things that you knew about? What was that process of discovering and finding potential platforms to get the word out about your book?
Well, that was, excuse me, that was definitely a challenge at first. Like, I wanted to do podcasts, and we had talked about this last year when it was just like, there's so many podcasts out there. You can't just Google podcasts, writers podcasts, because you're going to get the ones that that have Oprah on it, And that was, I remember it was last summer, I was telling you that I'm like, I don't know how to find a podcast, because if I find a podcast, it's like the NPR podcast. Okay. The starting out novelist isn't going to be, or me, then I'm not going to say starting out novelist, me, I'm not going to be on NPR anytime soon. So how do I narrow it down to, podcast hosts that are willing to chat with the new independently published author? It took a while, but just like I got this from you. You had told me to look up my favorite authors who are in the genre of the book that my book is like, in my genre, the same style, and see what podcasts that they had gone on. They had gone on pretty big podcasts, but what happens is then the algorithm kind of shows you other podcasts, and then it just becomes like a big web where it's just there's only almost too many podcasts to choose from. And it kind of happens organically. Like, I'm constantly getting, suggestions on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook to check out a new podcast. And I'm like, oh, I don't know that one. And I'll jot it down and see if it would be a good fit. But it was the follow the leader method that you were telling us about last year, where it's just take an author that you admire and see what they've done and just kind of go from there. And the research is actually really fun. It's kind of the side of marketing. Like, everyone hates that word. Like, authors are always like, no, I'm not a marketer, I'm an author. It's actually fun. I get to take a break from writing the greatest story ever, and just go, okay, why don't I just kind of turn my brain off and just kind of go in a different direction, use the other side, which I find it feels like autopilot for me, because it's just clicking and writing things down. It's very administrative. So that was how I got into finding ideal podcasts for me. And I was booked on quite a few. And I'm in touch with a lot of those hosts. Like, I kind of made friends because these hosts are just awesome. They're everyday people who just love books, love writing. Some are authors themselves. And I mean, just chatting with people is fun. Not everyone likes it, but I like it. I'm from Long Island. I'm an Italian girl. I like talking.
Yeah, that's great. It can be a lot of fun. I think for some authors, they start out and they're like, oh, I don't know about like going out and doing these interviews or whatever. And then you do it and they're like, oh, it's just a conversation. And I'm a hardcore introvert. And at the same time, I enjoy this. I enjoy chatting with you and enjoy chatting with other authors. And it's just a conversation, especially when you're talking about something that you enjoy and you get, someone who also can nerd out about whatever the topic is that you're writing about. And so you talked about follow the leader, looking at authors that you admire, looking at other places they've been featured. There's also something that you did where it's looking at the themes of your books. So for like zines or podcasts, how did you tie in? Did you get on some places that were related to like music or pop culture or things like that?
I did. I was on some music podcasts and talking about all the bands that were mentioned in the book. Like the host, she was like, I can't believe you mentioned this and that band. I haven't heard about them in years. And so we talked about that. And that was a cool, one of them was a really cool show because I got to, make a playlist. So I got to spin a few songs. So I picked songs that were mentioned in the book. So it was kind of like a playlist for the book. That was really fun because I had nothing to do with writing. She didn't ask about the craft. She was just like, what are your favorite records? And I was like, yes.
Yeah. And that's the thing with some of the podcasts and blogs and things like that. So you're not going on there like, here's my book, here's all about my book. I mean, you might mention a little. It's usually the themes, the topics, the ideas in there. You talk about it being fun. Like I myself, when I was funny enough, getting a music degree, I was like not into the marketing or business side. I'm like, I just want to do the creative stuff. And I realize now working with many authors, it's a similar sort of feeling. I'm not a marketer. I'm just a writer. I'm a creative. I like writing the books. And then it was creating the connection where I realized that part of what I fell in love with the marketing side is sometimes it's just a reframe. And I realized when I started to love marketing, part of it was I love psychology. It was like my favorite class in high school, favorite class in college, or my psychology classes. And I just love psychology, how humans work. I love, coaching people and helping them make decisions and all this sort of stuff about human behavior. And I'm big on like profile, like human behavior profiling sort of stuff. And then marketing kind of became an outlet for that and also a creative expression. So now it's like, if you can find those things that you love, the themes or the concepts, and tie it together. If someone loves entertaining people, then how can you use entertainment in marketing? If you love storytelling, how can you apply the storytelling, the marketing? Most effective marketing often is storytelling. So it's just creating those connections. And so you created connections not only for when it comes to podcasts, places that are, pretty traditional. They maybe interview authors in particular genres. You also looked at themes, which is another great thing. What are the themes in my book about music, pop culture, and going on places that talk about that. And then talk a little bit about finding the places. And then you reached out. And this is another thing that some authors, they go, what do I say? They're not really confident in their outreach. And of course, there's quite a bit of depth. We could talk for hours about how to do outreach and all that. But what gave you the confidence? Or like, how did you approach it? Because I think some authors are going to be like, hey, I got this book. Will you feature me? And it's like, why would I feature you just because you say that? So what was your attitude or approach when you were reaching out to these podcasts or these zines or places in order to get them to say yes?
Well, I approached them as a fan. Sorry, everyone. I have allergies. It's springtime in Paris here. The flowers are blowing all over the place. So I'm sorry. I hope everyone can understand me. I I sound like a prepubescent boy.
All good.
Sorry.
You approached them as a fan.
What's that? Sorry, I approached them as a fan, and I just was like, I try to find a common ground of something I liked that they said, something I liked in their work. Like I didn't just cold email podcasters just because they had a podcast. I would listen to a few episodes, and Derek, there were times where I'm like, this wouldn't be a good fit for me either, because it is a two-way street. It's not just, I want to be on your show. I want to be on your show. It's like, are we going to gel, or is it going to be a really weird 20 minutes, 30 minutes on your podcast? And I did listen to a few podcasts. I said, okay, we wouldn't be a good fit. But then there were some podcasts I listened to. I'm like, oh my God, she's so great. Yes. Everything they're saying is just so spot on. So I started with that. I made it about them and not so much about me. And then once I, got to the point of the email, and you had looked at some of my emails are long. I'm chatty even in emails. I got to the point at the end saying, all right, look, so I'm an author. I'd love to know, can we hang out on your show? Here's a link, with all my stuff. Let me know. But I started with why I wanted to be on their show and why I thought it would be a good fit for them as well as me. But really, why would I be an asset for their time? I think they appreciated that.
Yeah, that's so key.
I got a pretty good response. I mean, I'm pretty much a 90%, positive response rate. And then the rest were just no responses, even if I did a follow-up, but that's okay. Not everyone is into it.
Yeah, 90% response. For those who know about, let's say, pitching or traditional pitches, that is exceptional. And it's because of doing exactly like you said, you approach them as a fan. And people want to know whether they're a blogger, whether they have some sort of zine or publication, if they're, of course, a podcast host. Does this person, have they actually checked out this work? And you've demonstrate to them as a fan that, hey, I've actually checked you out. I think I could contribute something to you in some sort of way. And so you do that. And it's also important what you said, where it's like, you have your own sort of standards. And this is important. It's not like, oh, I really don't like this show or this host, but I'm going to pitch him anyway. It's not that. It's like, do I actually vibe with this person? Would I enjoy having a conversation with them? And that goes back to marketing can be fun, because you're like, I would enjoy having a conversation with them. I would enjoy talking about these topics or these themes or whatever it is. When you feel that, not only are you more excited to reach out, it also helps you craft a message to them that's unique to them about what you might be able to offer them in an interview, or how it might be something that they would enjoy and that their listeners and their fans or their readers, whoever it is, would enjoy. So great lessons in here, Lisa. This is phenomenal. I can imagine for many authors, they're going to be inspired by what you have to say here. And if people want to find out more about your work, about your book, or upcoming books, depending on when they listen to this, maybe you'll have even more books out. How can people find out more about you?
You can go to my website at lisacmichaud.com. Should I spell it?
Yeah, I can spell it out here for you. So that's Lisa, Lisac, Michaud, Michaud.com. And we'll have a link to that.
And all my social handles are at Lisa C. Michaud, all across the board. I've even tried TikTok, totally embarrassing myself on that platform. I think I'm too old for it, but that's okay. Like, it's been fun. But yeah, just find me there, and definitely like drop me a line if you have anyone has any questions, if I can be of any help. I love talking about this because it's just been such a fun journey. Like, I look back at a year ago today, when I was in the bestseller secrets group for those first those 6 months, and I feel almost nostalgic on like how, I don't know, how green I was to the process, and how I was doing so many other things that we didn't touch upon on this interview, like audiobooks and stuff. But, I was just putting all this together. And now that it's like that part is over, I just feel like kind of like sad for it's like my kid went off to college. And when I look back at that time, like when we would log on, I think it was on Tuesday nights with the group, I loved it. I really did. And I will be back for the second book. So, because I have questions, I have new questions. But yeah, no, it's a really fabulous journey that I think everyone should at least try, because there's just something really special about like going onto Amazon. I have my book in stores too, and just seeing my book on the shelf, and it just goes, it's your baby. So I'll end on that note with my voice. I'm so sorry. I sound like such like a New Yorker, like from anyway.
Yeah, well, this is fantastic. You're an inspiration to me. I imagine you're going to be an inspiration to many people who are listening to this. Your willingness to just embrace the process. That's what it seems like to me. Is there's just you took it, and I know so many things that you've heard about, like going out there, getting on podcasts and things like that. Some authors, they hear these ideas and they kind of sit with it and they think about it, and 5 years later they're still thinking about it, and you get out there and you do it, and then you realize, hey, this can actually be fun. I think that's one of the big themes I want to keep coming back to, is you can find a way to make it fun. And when you simply embrace the process and go with it, it's fun. And then you even look back at it and you're like, oh, you kind of almost nostalgic about the early days of, first getting the book out there and launching it. So thank you so much, Lisa. This has been an absolute pleasure.